Hi there, everybody. This is David, and it's always good to wake up to some great news about turn-based RPGs. Here we have an article, we actually have multiple articles, with the heads of Atlus and Square Enix talking about how they're refocusing on turn-based RPGs, and I want to tell you all about it. And that's definitely worth a sub as you come and you join a party and you level on up with me. Thank you so much for your sub, your like, and your brand new hype. It helps me out a ton. So we have the head of Persona, plus we have the director of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Yoshi P himself, all talking about this, and all pretty much saying the same thing, that turn-based RPGs are here, they're more popular than ever, and we need to refocus on them. They actually said, JRPG, turn-based RPGs haven't ever left, it's just that these more recent, they never name the names, these more recent critically acclaimed games have brought renewed attention to them. What are they talking about? They're talking about Clair Obscur Expedition 33 and Baldur's Gate 3, obviously. And they don't really mince words either whenever they're like, all these games, these turn-based games, they came out of Japan, they're JRPGs, we are known for them, but we kind of been ignoring them, and the sales haven't been great for them, but then these Western studios come out, and they did it, and sales are great, and they're not exactly happy about it. I think that they think that the West is kind of stealing their thunder. So Mr. Wada, he is the head of Persona at Atlus. He actually went on to say, "What we're calling a resurgence may simply be the rediscovery of things that had fallen outside of our field of view." So that's basically saying, we were so focused on these action RPGs that these kids seem to like that we weren't even thinking about turn-based RPGs. So to me, that's him kind of being out of touch. So he even says that discussions were shifted following the recent wave of high-quality turn-based RPGs released in the West. So the discussions before this were what? What were they discussing? Were they discussing action RPGs? Were they discussing maybe taking Persona and turning it into an action RPG? What exactly were they discussing before Expedition 33 and Baldur's Gate 3 came out? Because now the discussions have shifted towards turn-based, even though they were always turn-based. Maybe that's why Persona 6 has been kind of in development hell for 10-something years now. Same thing with Dragon Quest 12 and the Final Fantasy series. To the lesser part, but yeah, Dragon Quest 12 has been forever, and I remember actually back whenever Dragon Quest 9 was being released, and they talked about making it an action-based game. I remember reading an article about that, and the Japanese audience got such an uproar that they were like, okay, no, we're going to go back to turn-based, but this was the last turn-based game, and they kept it turn-based, but then when Dragon Quest 12 came around, they said, we're going to make it more adult. We're going to make it more darker. We're going to do an action take on it. And that's been in development hell, too. So I think discussions have turned more turn-based. Wada goes on to say, "I don't think that turn-based elements are something that we should let fade away. I don't personally feel that turn-based systems are particularly popular at the moment, but I do sense that the recent critically acclaimed games have brought renewed attention to them. I suspect the perception of turn-based combat as outdated, almost like a fossil, came about because many developers followed trends and shifted towards action or action-oriented gameplay instead of refining high-quality turn-based game designs." I think he is throwing shade at Square Enix, because Square Enix has famously said, Final Fantasy doesn't follow a trend, Final Fantasy sets the trends. But here he's saying, we've kind of followed the trend. At least he's saying that some companies have followed the trend. So I've just got to say, all of this happened because I lived through this in my 30s. All this happened during the PS3 era. JRPG was almost used like a slur in the Western game publishers and the magazines and everything. The publishers kind of hated them, the reviewers would make fun of them, so turn-based RPGs, they kind of moved underground off the main consoles. They moved on to the PSP and the Nintendo DS to the portable consoles. Even Final Fantasy 13 shifted. It went from turn-based in 13.2, and then kind of an action thing happening in 13.3. Then 15, action. 16, action. Final Fantasy VII Remake, action. I wonder what's going to happen with Final Fantasy XVII now that discussions have shifted. So yeah, at the end of the PS3 era, though, another game came out towards the end of there, which also sold like hotcakes and may have shifted the discussion back towards turn-based RPGs with the PS4 and everything else, and that was Persona 5. Persona 5 came out on the PS3, and it sold like hotcakes. You know, everybody wanted it. He then goes on to talk about, this is Yoshi P. He's saying that, you know, new generations haven't been able to connect with the series, with Final Fantasy, in the same way as older generations because these new installments take so long to make. And yeah, that's the truth. Final Fantasy is taking forever. Dragon Quest is taking forever. Persona is taking forever because they keep on shifting their focus, I think, because they keep on shifting what they want to do. And instead of just putting out a really good game with a good story, well told, with solid systems that work and have worked for 40 plus years now, they always seem to want to kind of reinvent the wheel. And I don't really get that. Now let's talk about what Mr. Hamaguchi has to say. That is the Final Fantasy Rebirth and Remake director. And he goes on to say that hybrids of turn-based and action elements may have been inevitable as pure turn-based RPGs lost ground to action with younger, newer generations of gamers. So he's going on to say that, you know, the older generation likes turn-based, the younger generation likes action, so we did this hybrid thing happening. We've seen the hybrid thing in the Trails series. We've seen the hybrid thing in Metaphor as well. However, I think that what they did in Trails and Metaphor is pretty much like you use action for the trash mobs, and then you use turn-based for, you know, the more powerful mobs, the mobs that are on your level, and the boss fights and things like that. It's just kind of a way to quickly get through low-level areas, kind of in the same way that Earthbound just kind of lets you, you know, skip combat and stuff like that. So then he goes on to say, this is Mr. Hamaguchi, Final Fantasy VII. He says, at the same time, it's also true that when we look at younger players, they increasingly favor more real-time experiences in games. I believe that they're a generation that's naturally accustomed to receiving instant feedback upon input. So with that context in mind, it may have been inevitable for turn-based games to incorporate real-time decision-making through action elements to gain prominence. I think that this reflects players' desire for both the excitement of strategy and the immediacy of the response. So he's basically denigrating younger gamers, saying that they don't like turn-based because it's old and antiquated. He's saying that they want an immediate response. He's saying that they don't have a good attention span. And I don't agree with any of that stuff at all. I think that younger gamers, they will play what's put in front of them. And if you give them a really good game, they will play it. Kind of like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, kind of like Baldur's Gate 3. If you give them a great, high-quality game that everybody loves, they will play it and they will enjoy it too. But if you keep on changing things and making these development cycles super long, then yeah, they can't get attached to them the same way that we did, where we got 4 Dragon Quest games on the NES, and I grew up with that. Like, that was great. Where we got, you know, like, what was it, like 10 something Final Fantasy games in the span of 10 years? Like, it was unbelievable how many games we got. Yeah, not all of them were localized, and it took quite some time for them to come out, but we did get them, and in a pretty quick way. But nowadays, it's so much harder for that. So, I just have to say that turn-based isn't dead. We still have other game series out there. Octopath Traveler, Bravely Default, Shin Megami Tensei, Monster Hunter Stories, The Legend of Heroes, Persona, Metaphor. You know, the classics are still there, but what is happening in the future? Will Final Fantasy XVII be turn-based? Will they maybe change the combat to an Expedition 33 sort of combat in Part 3 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake? Will Dragon Quest XII stay turn-based, or will they actually go towards action? I don't think that they will, but they have said it in the past. I want to hear from y'all what you think about this news, because it's just exciting for me to see my favorite genre of games getting this resurgence. Don't get me wrong, I love action. I love strategy, but turn-based has always been my favorite. I just love it, so I'm super happy that it is getting the respect that it deserves. Let me know how you feel about this in the comments, and as always, have a good day.